When I asked Eric why he had created a family card for his in-laws, he chuckled and replied, "They're my family, so of course they deserve one. Do you have a problem with that?" His tone shifted as he continued, "If you understood the importance of those who support you when you're alone, you wouldn't question it." His assertiveness caught me off guard. Eric, always direct, elaborated further. "If you truly value them, you contribute more to my family. Until then, consider it a probationary period." The concept of trial membership within a family dynamic was new to me. Eric explained, "It means you're not fully accepted yet. If that bothers you, you're welcome to leave. For now, it's just the five of us." This revelation stunned me, and I swiftly decided to cancel our joint credit cards and move out. My name is Sandra, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a professional illustrator from my home studio. Previously, I was employed by a major advertising firm but opted for freelance work about 4 years ago after getting married. I grew up with my grandparents after losing my parents in an accident. When I went to college, I returned to my parents' old neighborhood in the city center where I've lived ever since. I met Eric, my future husband, at a charming Italian restaurant where he worked. The place was known for its delicious food at reasonable prices, making it a favorite among me and my colleagues. Eric's charismatic presence immediately caught my attention. He had a unique, captivating aura. Even the manager joked that people came just to see him. It was hard not to be drawn to him. Our connection deepened quickly, and soon everyone regarded us as a couple. Before I knew it, we were married. I don't recall much of that time. It felt like a blur. However, my feelings for Eric were genuine, and I was thrilled about our union. Leaving my corporate job amicably, I embraced freelancing, which Eric supported while he continued working at the restaurant. We chose a simple life, opting for a small signing of marriage papers instead of a lavish wedding. Our families met briefly, which was enough for us. With Eric busy at work and me juggling household duties alongside my freelance projects, our routines were erratic. Still, we made an effort to share meals when we could. It was a modest but fulfilling life. A year into our marriage, Eric mentioned that his family planned to visit. I was excited to bond with them, especially given my admiration for Eric's large family and my own early loss of my parents. However, when Eric's family arrived, 5 of them in total, I was taken aback by their boldness. His elder sister, who was 36 and worked at a local store, immediately asked, "Which room's mine?" This was a stark contrast to the polite demeanor I remember from our previous encounters. Beside her was Eric's 20-year-old sister, who remained as reserved as ever, hardly saying a word. Following the elder sister's lead, I showed them to the guest room and directed Eric's parents to my parents' old room, which had a Japanese style that I thought they might appreciate. Once settled, his sister made a bold proclamation. "Now that we're all under the same roof, you better start treating our family right." Her words puzzled me, and when I looked to Eric for clarification, he chuckled mysteriously. It was then that he revealed they had given up their previous home and moved in here permanently without any prior discussion. "Sorry, our family home had to be vacated suddenly, and they had nowhere else to go," he explained. I wished he had informed me sooner. I had assumed their stay would only be temporary. From the moment they moved in, Eric's family showed no restraint. All 4 of them expected me to manage everything while they did nothing but issue commands and complaints. They made no effort to find jobs or a place of their own. When I inquired about their employment status, I was in for yet another shock. "Oh, I quit that awful job at the supermarket," Eric's sister confessed. I had misunderstood her situation, thinking she had a steady job. In reality, her part-time employment had ended, and she admitted she hadn't held a consistent job since high school. Eric's parents also had part-time jobs they had abandoned before moving in, and his other sister, claiming to be a student, was unemployed. "Why should I work when I'm part of a well-off family now?" she said arrogantly. When I pressed her about what she meant by a well-off family, I received a startling response. You got a hefty settlement and insurance payout after your parents' accident. You don't even have a mortgage on this place. You can live comfortably without working," she laughed. I shared my concerns with Eric when he returned home, but he reacted with anger, a side of him I had never seen before. "Everyone's exhausted from being uprooted. Give them time to recover, or do you want to kick out my family, Sandra?" he challenged. I was stunned into silence. His tone softened as he added, "I'm sorry for yelling. It's been a tough day for me too. Can you please try to be a bit more understanding?" Looking back, I realized Eric was skilled at manipulating situations with a mix of kindness and severity, but in that moment, I failed to see it. I reluctantly agreed to endure a bit longer. However, the situation with Eric's family soon became increasingly oppressive. They treated me like a servant and demanded money for outings, claiming they needed cash for job hunting, something I suspected was untrue. Pointing this out would only lead to hours of blame from the entire family. Sharing my concerns with Eric didn't help either. Everyone's frustrated about not finding jobs. Just bear with it a little longer. I'll talk to them, he would say, trying to smooth things over. As time passed, I gradually lost hope that speaking up would change anything. Nonetheless, the incessant requests for money from Eric's family began to taper off, which I suspected was because Eric had finally talked to them. Yet the money I had provided earlier was predictably never returned. 3 months into this ordeal, I stumbled upon a distressing discovery. Our credit card bill was unusually high. Worried about potential fraud, I immediately checked the statement and found all the charges were on family credit cards. The expenses spanned a variety of items: food, drinks, books, games, and even luxury brands. To my dismay, the statement showed that 5 different family credit cards were in use, all under my name. Eric had been the one managing these cards, persuading me that it would be simpler for me to handle them. "Can I just leave this to you?" he had asked. Unbeknownst to me, extra cards had been issued without my consent. It became clear why Eric had stopped asking for cash. They had switched to using credit cards for their purchases instead of cash withdrawals. When I confronted Eric about issuing family cards for his in-laws without my approval, he replied nonchalantly, "Well, you complain when they say they're broke, so what else could I do? Plus, you know who supported you when you were alone, right? Can you really speak like that to the family of your benefactor?" His bold and dismissive tone shocked me. It was unlike anything I had heard from him before. He continued, "If you're thankful you should do more for my family, then I'll accept you as part of the family too. Until then, think of it as a trial period." I had never heard of a trial period in marriage before. My stunned silence prompted Eric to elaborate. "This means you're not officially part of the family yet. If you're not okay with that, you're free to leave anytime. Right now, it's just the 5 of us. Unless the freeloaders leave," he added. In that moment, I saw Eric's true nature, and I felt as if all the color had drained from my face. I began to contemplate divorcing him and questioned why I had married him in the first place. Initially, I had been drawn to his physical attractiveness like many other women. At first, it was mere infatuation with his looks, lacking any substantial reason. I recalled one visit to the restaurant where Eric worked. He'd approached me as I was heading to the restroom and said, "You seem different, Sandra." Kind of mysterious. Sorry, I shouldn't say that to a customer. I was taken aback but intrigued, and from that moment on, I paid more attention to him. Looking back, it all adds up. I remembered a colleague once jokingly saying I was a wealthy lady living alone in a condo, and shortly after, Eric began showing more interest in me. Perhaps he was intrigued by my wealth and living situation. To be honest, Eric wasn't exactly my type. If I'm being blunt, he seemed a bit superficial, leaning more towards a modern style rather than anything deeper. I had always preferred mature men who spoke softly and seriously, yet somehow I found myself falling for Eric. A typical handsome guy who could easily charm any woman, especially someone like me, fresh to the working world and unaccustomed to such attention. Reflecting on this now filled me with frustration and shame. The urge to lash out and break things around the house surged within me, a stark contrast to the controlled life I had worked so hard to maintain. But instead of giving in to that impulse, I decided to carefully plan my next moves for revenge. I knew I had to play the long game, managing the situation with the same cunning Eric had used to manipulate me. The condo we lived in had been purchased on a mortgage by my father shortly after my birth. It wasn't expensive back then, but rapid development in the area and the addition of a new shopping center had turned it into a sought-after luxury residence. My parents had chosen a large condo, hoping to expand our family, and it now provided ample space, even with Eric's family invading our home. Their presence was a constant irritation, especially since I worked from home, but I endured it all for the sake of my plan. When I was 4, tragedy struck. Both my parents died in a car accident while returning from my paternal grandfather's funeral. They collided with a speeding car on the freeway, and that day, I was supposed to be with them but stayed home due to a high fever from the flu. making me the sole survivor of our immediate family. Fortunately, the mortgage was covered by the group credit life insurance they had, leaving me responsible only for the management fees and property taxes for the condo. Eric had suggested he could contribute a bit more than the cost of those fees since there was no mortgage. If I pitch in that much, we should be able to manage with your income, right? We can each use our earnings for personal expenses. Sounds fair, doesn't it? He proposed. I agreed, hoping it might ease some of my financial burden at that time. I was still somewhat blinded by my feelings for Eric and went along with his suggestion. It seemed he saw himself as the head of the household, providing for me, while in reality, I was the one covering most of our living expenses, utilities, groceries, and social outings. Now, with 5 extra dependents in the house, managing on my income alone was becoming unsustainable. Yet I feigned ignorance, bearing the mounting strain as I bided my time, watching Eric's family indulge in shopping sprees at my expense, reminding myself that I would have the last laugh. 6 months into my plan to escape, I reached my breaking point and knew it was time to act. Exhausted yet resolute, I confronted Eric. I'm at my limit. It's time to make a choice. It's either me or your family, I declared, presenting him with an ultimatum. He was visibly taken aback, but I pressed on, undeterred. None of your family members lift a finger to help around the house. They just dump all their chores on me. You know I work from home. I'm not just idly passing the time. They treat me like a freeloader and belittle me, claiming you're the one supporting me. I've had enough, I cried out, facing him head on. Eric merely smirked in response. Then you should leave. Didn't I warn you before? You're not truly part of this family yet. Giving up now means you haven't earned your place in it, he retorted. Shocked by his coldness, I stared at him in disbelief. What's surprising? If you can't tolerate my family, then it's you who must go, he concluded. This stark revelation opened my eyes to the depth of his manipulation and solidified my resolve. It was time to reclaim my life and my home. I realized the extent of Eric's scheme. He had orchestrated this entire scenario, hoping that his family's overwhelming presence would drive me out, making it easier for him to claim the apartment and possibly part of my savings as alimony. Despite my suspicions, this realization still hit me like a cold wave. I had once loved and married Eric, but now, this clarity catalyzed my decision to leave him for good. I was resolute. I've decided to divorce you, Eric. But let's be clear, this condo is mine and I am not at fault here. You brought your family into our home without my consent and allowed them to disrespect me. Eric looked genuinely surprised by my firm stance. He was unaccustomed to me defying him. Until now, I had mostly acquiesced to his demands. Recalling those moments only fueled my anger. I can't tolerate another moment with you and your family, so I'm leaving now. But be ready to leave as well, I told him assertively. Flustered, Eric shot back, This is ridiculous. This is our home. We're not going anywhere. Ever heard of tenant rights? You can't just evict us from our own home. Ignoring his protests, I stormed out of the apartment and sought refuge at my grandparents' house. I shared everything with them and asked for shelter until the situation was resolved. They were appalled by what I had endured and scolded me for not coming to them sooner. With tears in their eyes, they embraced me. I'm sorry, Grandma and Grandpa. I know I worried you, but I'll be all right now, I reassured them, forcing a smile through my tears. The day after I left, Eric contacted me, perplexed. What's all this about? What mail are you talking about? He asked, referring to the certified letter from my lawyer. I was impressed by the swift action of my legal team. I'm not paying any alimony, and I'm not leaving the condo, Eric insisted, oblivious to his lack of legal standing. Since we were married, the condo was jointly owned. If that's your stance, then compensate me for half its value to buy out my share, he demanded, making an absurd claim. Please communicate through my lawyer from now on, I stated firmly, ending the call. I expected he might try to reach me again, but I had no desire to continue the conversation. True to my expectations, Eric called again the next morning, repeating his previous questions with no new approach. What mail are you referring to? The cards aren't working. What did you do? He pressed. What I did was cancel it. That card belonged to me. You were merely an authorized user. I transferred all the accounts linked to that card to a new one before I left and canceled the original, I explained. Naturally, once mine was terminated, the family cards ceased to function. You covered the management fees and property taxes for the first 5 months only. It's not substantial, but I can deduct that from the alimony if you prefer, I added, turning his logic against him. This confrontation marked the beginning of a new chapter for me, one where I would no longer be manipulated or burdened by Eric and his scheming family. I was determined to reclaim my life and my home. The muted shouting coming from Eric on the phone didn't surprise me. He had managed to pay the agreed amount for only the first 5 months, after which he began making various excuses related to work and personal issues, always finding reasons to delay payments before stopping altogether. If he had forgotten about his commitments and assumed they were still being handled, that was quite the oversight. But frankly, his lapses no longer mattered to me. I was resolute in cutting ties completely. That's the situation, so please reimburse your share of the living expenses I've been covering, I stated firmly. I had kept meticulous records of our household expenditures, which I planned to use as evidence to fairly divide our assets. That's marital property, he argued. Yes, understood. Let's divide it accordingly, I replied. He ended the call with a reminder that felt more like a warning not to forget his supposed entitlements. A few days later, he called again, repeating his earlier questions. It seemed his memory was short and his vocabulary limited. What do you mean by the division of shared property? Why is it zero? You must be swimming in cash from your parents' insurance and alimony, he accused. I patiently explained that my pre-marriage savings were not part of the marital property, and since we hadn't accumulated any savings during our marriage, the balance was naturally zero. Don't accuse me of deceit. If you doubt my honesty, you might want to seek legal advice. Henceforth, kindly communicate through my attorney. I won't engage in direct communication with you any longer, I declared, then ended the call and blocked his number. 1 month after my departure, Eric and his family finally vacated the apartment. Their departure wasn't due to a change of heart, but rather because they could no longer sustain their lavish lifestyle without access to my funds. Predictably, Eric's income alone wasn't enough to support a family of 5 accustomed to extravagant spending. Tightening their belts wasn't an option they were willing to consider. I had intentionally allowed them to use the card, knowing it would lead to this outcome. As financial pressures mounted, his family began badgering Eric for shopping funds, and when he refused, they resorted to stealing from his wallet. Even in their frustration, they blamed him for my departure. To compound their troubles, I arranged for the utilities, electricity, gas, and water, to be disconnected since I had no intention of residing there any longer. Eric tried to get the utilities reinstated over the phone, but since the condo was in my name, no one else could restore them once I ordered their termination. During the scorching summer and early autumn, his family struggled to endure the sweltering heat and eventually vacated the condo. Their destination was of no concern to me. Eric tried to persist until the end, but ultimately capitulated due to the lack of electricity and the inability to maintain basic hygiene. To my relief, the divorce proceedings progressed more swiftly than anticipated. Not because Eric had a change of heart, but simply because the reality of his untenable situation became undeniable. His actions betrayed the sanctity of our marriage as he pursued relationships with other women, misleading them with the allure of his so-called luxurious downtown apartment. Astonishingly, he carried out these behaviors under the watchful eyes of his family, who chose to ignore his indiscretions, showing that such behavior was expected of him. Before leaving, I had discreetly installed cameras throughout the house, capturing clear evidence of his wrongdoings. Perhaps Eric underestimated me, but the evidence of his disrespect was undeniable. He had invited his family into my home without my consent, incurred substantial expenses on our joint credit card, and then left me to foot the bill. Moreover, his infidelity was the final straw. I sought significant compensation in alimony for these transgressions. When confronted with the financial consequences of his actions, Eric visibly crumbled and pleaded for reconciliation. However, I had no intentions of going back. Knowing he couldn't cover the costs, I pressured him to borrow as much as possible from his company and seize whatever assets I could. When I threatened legal action for the fraudulent use of our family card, he reluctantly agreed to my terms. I could only hope he earnestly attempted to settle his debts. The divorce has since been finalized, and I am now staying at my grandparents' home, while I'm still undecided about what to do with the apartment. Though it holds sentimental value as an inheritance from my late parents, the recent events have tainted my memories of the place. Selling it might be an option I consider. Professionally, my career as an illustrator is thriving. For now, I am content working from my grandparents' home. depending on their support a bit longer as I prepare for the next chapter in my life. As I move forward, I am resolved to be more discerning in choosing a partner, valuing traits beyond mere attractiveness. I hope to find a life partner with whom I can share my journey, someone who respects and values the same principles I do.